Hello and welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast, part of the 90 Min Football Network. As ever, I'm your host, Harry Symeou, and on this edition, we're going to be talking Mikel Arteta. Of course, the Spaniard has come under fire in the last few days, given Arsenal's disappointing defeat right here on Saturday against Brighton and Hove Albion. But what should we be feeling now? What should we be thinking now? Does this mean that Mikel Arteta isn't the man? Does this mean that we have every right to be in meltdown mode? Or do we, given that Arsenal are still very much in the hunt for the top four, have a responsibility to be a little bit calmer and a little bit more measured in the way we look at this? Well, on this very short edition, this bonus piece of content, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the job that Mikel Arteta has done and why the job that Mikel Arteta has done can be a good one without him necessarily being the man who takes us on to the next level. Now, I know what some of you are going to be saying. I know some of the critics are going to be right in the comment section saying that I'm making excuses or saying that I'm giving him a free pass. That's absolutely not what I am doing. I think it's important that after a disappointing result like the one against Brighton, we take a few days and we step back and we take stock of the situation, because it's very easy, I think, to be overreactionary in the aftermath of a disappointing result. It's very easy to be overreactionary when we look down the road and we see Tottenham Hotspur picking up points and, I guess, taking the driving seat in the race for the top four. So I'm really, really mindful of the fact that in the sort of direct aftermath, you can be a little bit emotional, you can be a little bit over the top. And I was probably over the top in the sense of I jumped to the manager's defence, perhaps more than I should, even though I was critical of his selection, even though it didn't make sense to me, and even though I thought that played a huge part in the outcome of the game. I think you really do need to take a step back and think about this logically. So when Mikel Arteta came into the club, a lot of us were surprised. A lot of us thought, how is this guy who's not managed at the highest level, who's only been a number two, who's only been second fiddle to Pep Guardiola, landed a job like this one at a huge football club like this one with no experience? Well, it was clear to me at that point that Arsenal had decided to go down a completely different route. And that different route is around rebuilding. Arsenal need to rebuild. We tried to patch things up after Arsene Wenger's departure. Unai Emery was the man who came in and did that. There wasn't cohesion at the top of the chain. There wasn't any sort of unity in the way the club was operating. You had Sven Mislintat choosing players that Unai Emery then had to work with. You had Raul Sanllehi dipping his hands in the pie as well, trying to bring players in. And we all know that he overpaid or sanctioned deals that involved overpaying for the likes of Nicolas Pepe and William Saliba, you could argue as well. And nobody was singing from the same hymn sheet. Then we had the departure of Ivan Gazidis as well, someone who was huge in the sort of Wenger out sort of movement and was really, really sort of, I don't know what the word is, but really sort of leading that charge from boardroom level. And then we ended up with this manager in Unai Emery, who's a good manager with a good track record and is proving again this season that he can do good things with even limited resources, as he's doing at Villarreal now. Congratulations to them and him, of course, for making the Champions League semi-final. But the appointment of Mikel Arteta signalled to me that Arsenal were in this for the long haul, and that the approach was now, after trying, as I say, to patch up following Wenger's departure, Arsenal realised, understood that they needed to strip it all back and start again. Now, Mikel Arteta can be the right man to strip it back, can be the right man to rebuild it, can be the right man to get rid of the deadwood, give the youngsters the opportunities that they need. He's a very, very good coach, and I think that played a big part in him getting the job. He can do all of that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's the man that's going to take us on to Premier League titles or to Champions League titles or to being in the Champions League regularly. Sometimes when you're rebuilding a football club, it isn't just with one man. Sometimes you'll need to change things and you'll need to make different appointments along the way before you get to where you want to get to. If you look at Manchester City, they're a prime example of that. With all the riches in the world, they appointed certain managers. They had Mark Hughes at the start. They had Roberto Mancini. They had Pellegrini before they got to Pep Guardiola level. So the point is, when you're rebuilding or when you are building a project, it's not always the case that one man is going to take you all the way in that project. The project is the football club's, not Mikel Arteta's. And so there will be a point where a change may or may not be needed. Mikel Arteta has to prove that he's capable of developing himself and improving himself to take this club to the next level. But in terms of the work he's done, you have to give him credit. He's cleared out so much dead wood. He's got rid of people who were impacting negatively on the culture within the Emirates Stadium. He's got rid of all of them. And look, let's be honest, if you look at a lot of those cases, a lot of those players have gone elsewhere and proven to be the same. You know, you look at somebody like Matteo Guendouzi. We heard comments from Hertha Berlin, with whom he was on loan. We heard from the coach that he's very childish, that his attitude is not quite 100% right. He's gone to Marseille. It's been a little bit better for him, but he's playing at a much lower level. The French Ligue 1 is at a much lower level than the Premier League, and that's the reality of it. You look at Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, clearly a very, very talented player, but clearly didn't want to buy into what Arsenal were doing here, wasn't happy to follow the rules, wasn't happy to adhere to the sort of non-negotiables that Mikel Arteta's put in place, and he's gone. He's gone. We move on from it. A lot of these people keep getting referred to every time Arsenal have a bad result. Every time Arsenal have a bad result, we hear about the January transfer window. And I've got to be honest, I'm fed up of it. I mean, if you look back at the January transfer window and the players that we allowed to leave, with the exception of Aubameyang, who's gone on to Barcelona and is doing good things, Ainsley Maitland-Niles wasn't going to help us in our current predicament. Was anybody else of those players that we allowed to leave going to take us onto another level, was going to help us in our current predicament? I don't think so. Ainsley Maitland-Niles, for me, had proven time and time again that in midfield, he was a bit out of his depth. I think with Callum Chambers, he was a player who was very much up and down in his Arsenal form. Sometimes looked good, sometimes didn't look so good, but clearly was lacking in game time and wasn't going to get that at Arsenal Football Club. The clear out that happened in January had to happen in a lot of ways because we needed to clear the decks ahead of the summer. And as I say, Mikel Arteta has had to oversee all of that. He's had to oversee a really, really difficult period, whilst the fans' expectations of him are still right up here. Did anyone think at the start of the season that Arsenal would be in contention for a Champions League spot? I think if we're being honest, most people thought that that was way out of our reach. If we're being honest, there were a lot of people, both within sort of the Arsenal sphere and outside of it, who thought that 8th, 7th was the best that we could hope for. So to be in the race going into the middle of April has exceeded most people's expectations. The expectation has changed a little bit since sort of the season started and since we've seen how the other teams have been and we've seen how it's all unfolded. But at the end of the day, I think it's ridiculous to rip up what you thought was fair and realistic at the start of the season because of Manchester United and because of Tottenham's level. I think that to me just doesn't make sense. I think the most true objectives that you set will be at the beginning of a season because you don't have any bias. You're not looking at the other clubs and expecting them to fail. You can't rely on other people to fail. Therefore, you need to set your objectives in line with what you believe that you can achieve. And I think the fact that we've been in the top 4 race and the fact that Tottenham have had problems earlier in the season and Manchester United too, that's kind of overinflated in a lot of people's minds what this Arsenal team are actually capable of. You can have opportunities. Opportunities come in life all the time, but if you're not good enough to take them, then they're irrelevant. So Arsenal have an opportunity to finish in the top 4. We still do, despite all the negativity around the club over the last few days. But in order to achieve that, we need to be good enough to capitalise on the problems that Manchester United and Tottenham have both had this season. And what we're seeing is the team levelling out a little bit. And we're starting to see that actually in terms of our depth, in terms of the strength of the overall squad, perhaps we're not quite good enough. Now, has Mikel got a lot to learn? Yeah, of course he has. I thought he got it horribly wrong at the weekend against Brighton in his decision to take Granit Xhaka out of the midfield, play him at left back and leave Albert Sambi Lokonga in there completely isolated. I've said it on the post-match show. I think it impacted on a number of players. It impacted on Xhaka, impacted on Lokonga, impacted on Smith Rowe and Odegaard, who had to play very, very different roles as a consequence of that reshuffle. I think he got it horribly wrong. But he will get things wrong because he's a new manager. And in the club's eyes, whether we like it or not, they're happy to take those learning mistakes. They're happy to take the consequences of him kind of teething, I guess, as a football manager, in the hope that the positives that he brings, which is the resetting of the culture, the being strong in certain situations, they're hoping that the positives will, of course, outweigh the negatives. So back to my original point, Mikel Arteta could do a very, very good job, but still not be the man that takes us on to the next level. And that is a conversation that we can have at the end of the season, perhaps the season after, depending on how things go. But at this moment in time, you cannot underestimate the amount of disruption and the amount of change that this guy has had to oversee and had to deal with during his tenure as Arsenal boss so far. So I'm not calling for his head. I think people that are calling for his head have lost their heads, to be honest with you, off the back of that result against Brighton. If Arsenal finish in the top 4, it would be amazing. It would be the absolute maximum that this team were achieving, capable of achieving, I beg your pardon, at the outset. If we finish 5th, it's a solid season for me. If we finish 6th, that's just about what's acceptable. Anything below that, I think we can have another conversation, only this time about Mikel Arteta's future. Because despite what I've said, despite the fact that I believe this is a long-term project, despite the fact that I'm willing to give it time, despite the fact that I don't think miracles are going to happen overnight, this is Arsenal Football Club. This is a big damn football club, and there are expectations that need to be met. Minimum expectations for me are for this club to be in Europe. And to not be in Europe for a second successive season would be a big, big problem. So, let's get behind the team. Let's get behind the manager. A few games to go in the season, still capable of achieving what it is we set out to achieve at the start of the campaign and more. The race for the top 4 is not over. This is Tottenham Hotspur we're talking about. We've all seen them capitulate in the past before. So, not all is lost. Not all is lost, but there's some big, big games coming up for this football club. And I just don't see what going around sort of criticising the manager, criticising the players and being super toxic is going to achieve. There's a brilliant interview that's just come out with Granit Xhaka on the Players' Tribune, in which he talks about the fear that players at this football club have when it comes to making mistakes, and that fear that we as a fan base put into them by being super critical and never being understanding of the fact that any mistakes made are not from a lack of trying. That fear is not helpful. It's a weight on the players' shoulders that they carry out onto that pitch every single week, and we've got to do our part as fans to get behind them, to support them. At the end of the season, we can have our post-mortem. At the end of the season, we can unpack it all and we can decide where it went wrong, where it went right, and what the next step is. I think that's the fair thing to do. But to be at this point, as I say, in the middle of April, challenging for a Champions League place has already exceeded the expectations many people had for this football club going into the campaign. And let's not forget that. Just one final point. I think it's important that when you look at the perception of Arsenal and you understand sort of, where it is that we should be, and then you put that into comparison to where we are, you have to take into consideration that people outside of the club will have a less biased view. You or me, we grew up watching Arsenal win things. I grew up watching Arsenal win things. So in the back of my mind, it's always, well, this is not good enough for Arsenal Football Club. But the landscape changes, football works in cycles. And I think sometimes it's best to step out of the Arsenal circle. Listen to what other people have to say about the club. Listen to what other people think this team are capable of, and listen to what other people think this team, or where other people think this team should be. And from there, you can often make a little bit more sense of the whole thing. So, yeah, let's see how it goes. But lots of big games to come. I think Mikel Arteta has been brought in to do a very specific job, which was to oversee a clear out and, of course, hopefully get us back into Europe in the process. But there will come a time where finishing 6th, 5th, if this club really wants to push on, is not going to be good enough. And perhaps he's not the man to take us to that next step. But we're still in rebuild phase. There's still a lot of work to be done before we can be considered regular contenders for that top 4. We've managed to get ourselves in there this season, and that's because we've achieved way more points than we did at this same stage last season. And do not forget that. Do not forget that there has been improvement. People don't think Mikel's the right man and think he should be gone now. That's a fair opinion to have. But there's a way of putting those opinions across. And I don't think we as a fan base in general are very good at doing that. Don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a comment below as well. What do you think? Do you think that Mikel Arteta could be this part of the rebuild and that we may need to look elsewhere if we're going to take it on to the next level? Do let me know. Get involved and I'll speak to you all soon. Cheers.